NFL Spotlight. I am your host, Ari Meirov. We are continuing our team-by-team previews. Make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube. And up next, we are on to the Chicago Bears. And joining me today, he does such a great job covering this team for CHGO Sports. He's the co-host of Hoge and Johns. It is Adam Hoge. Adam, great to have you on. How's everything going?
It's good. We're starting to get to the end of camp already, which is crazy. But thanks for having me on, Ari. This will be fun.
For sure. I mean, I appreciate having you on. You do a tremendous job covering this team, boots on the ground. You've been doing it for a very long time, and it's feels like exciting times in Chicago. It's year one of Ben Johnson, year four of GM Ryan Poles. I'll start off a bit of a general question. Like I said, last year definitely felt really exciting. We know what happened, but this year it feels like a different type of excitement, if that makes sense. What has been the vibe right now in camp the last couple of weeks with this team?
Yeah, I think it's been a lot of optimism and faith in what we're seeing from Ben Johnson. And it's. I mean, I could go through a long list of reasons of things that seem different. And somebody who's covered this team for 15 years. I've been through coaching changes. I've been through GM changes. We've all gone through those cycles before. Whether you're a fan or somebody in the media, and every time it happens, you're like, oh, this feels different and it's going to be better than, what went wrong before. And so you're, at least speaking for myself, I'm always trying to be guarded with that and, be a little bit careful, but, credit to Ben Johnson because he's just brought a different level of everything. I mean, name something: accountability, energy, intensity. He is very, very intense. I don't know if you saw even the fourth quarter of that preseason game the other night, but they were going for the shutout. I know it's preseason, but it was like, we are not going to let them score, and this matters so much right now. And so I think there's been some hesitancy a little bit maybe at the beginning from players of like, whoa, like this is different. It seems like maybe it's a little bit over the top. But I do think he has received that buy-in, and it's not just him, it's his staff. I mean, I'm not going to run through the whole staff, but it's pretty impressive. Dennis Allen, former head coach, obviously, Antoine Randall, I think he's one of the better assistants in the entire league. So Al Harris in the secondary on the defensive side, it's a better coaching staff. I don't know how else to put it. And so regardless, and I'm sure we're going to get in the Caleb Williams discussion and all this other stuff with players they've added or lost, but that's what you need in this league, right? You need good coaching. You need consistency. You need a guy who's going to be around for a decade. And we haven't seen him play a real game yet, but I feel pretty optimistic that Ben Johnson is different.
Now, I want to ask you about Ben, because a lot of people, when he was in Detroit, they thought of him as this mastermind who locks himself in a room and just draws up plays, and that's all he is. What have you seen of him as a head coach? Just, you mentioned the intensity, the attention to detail. Like, do you have the physicality apparently has been out there a lot. Like, what have you seen of him as a head coach? And have you been surprised that this is actually who he is?
Well, I'm not necessarily surprised because, just being in the NFC North, we have enough connections to Detroit, whether it's people in the organization, around the organization, or just reporters. And so when you're doing your deep dive into head coaching candidates, and we did sort of get a head start because Matt Eberflus was fired the day after Thanksgiving. We did in Chicago constantly have this debate about, quote unquote leader of men versus offensive guru. And, Mike Vrabel was a candidate, although it seemed like he'd probably go back to New England as soon as that job opened. With Ben Johnson, it was like, okay, well, we know what this guy is. He's made it very obvious. We got 3 years of data that he's had the best offense in terms of EPA. That's a significant sample size. So we know what that is. Can he command a locker room? No. Can he command the room in front of a whole team? Can he be that leader that you also need to be as a head coach? And you talk to people in Detroit and they're like, yeah, I don't know where this is coming from, where he just sort of locks himself in a room and, he's just drawing up X's and O's. He is intense. He holds players accountable. But we haven't seen that, right? When you're talking about coordinators becoming a head coach from the outside, you just see the press conferences if you're trying to watch them, right? So, But he got here, and really from his first press conference, it was impressive. And you could tell that there was going to be a different level of detail and intensity and accountability. We've heard that before, so we wanted to see it in action. Well, when it's your first practice and you throw the starters, kick them out of the drill temporarily, it's a pretty good sign that he's going to actually hold these guys accountable. I think that kind of set the tone in training camp, and it's been consistent ever since. And that's the key. You got to have that. You can't just do that once and then relax. You got to do that consistently every day. And to this point, we have seen that.
Well, he is the head coach of the team, but one of his biggest priorities is the quarterback, and we'll get into that right now. The offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle, was on this show last week, and he said that we gave Caleb Williams a lot initially. We want to see how much he could do with all of that, and eventually it's the coach's job to shape it up for what best fits him. I want to ask you, just seeing Caleb from minicamp to now the end of training camp, what have you seen with him, and how has he taken all of that information to where it is now?
Yeah, and I saw that interview. Nice job, Declan Doyle. That was good stuff on here. I I think that's the right approach. We've seen that approach before. I mean, they tried to, I think, really to Mitch Trubisky actually instead of Justin Fields, where they tried to do the same thing. We're going to kind of overload this guy in the offseason and then pare it back. Uh, that's not necessarily a revolutionary football coaching technique or idea. I think it's the right thing to do. And if it doesn't work out, that doesn't mean that it was necessarily wrong. So I was a little hesitant when you're kind of hearing that because I've covered that before. And it was ugly early. I mean, really, I think the first week of camp was not very good. They've been, I know there's like controversy about keeping training camp stats, but don't shoot the messenger. The Bears are keeping those stats for the quarterbacks, not just Caleb, all of them. They want these guys at 70% completion percentage. And they're on a daily basis, giving them printouts of what the results were from practice. Not the end of the world, just something to sort of track. And I kind of like it because I've been tracking it too. And it kind of helps you see if the progress has been linear. I not on a day-to-day basis, but from where Caleb is now, as we're recording this mid to late August compared to where he was a month ago when camp started, there's no question that he's gotten better. I think Sunday night's game against the Bills was a good example of that too. Yes, it's the preseason. Yes, they weren't playing the starters, but in terms of how quickly he was getting the ball out, his footwork, being decisive, understanding what he was looking at pre-snap and then post-snap, again, it's going to look completely different against the Vikings on Monday Night Football when Brian Flores is dialing up all kinds of crazy stuff compared to what the Bills were doing the other night. But there were some rotations, post-snap rotations and coverage where they were going from single high to cover 2 or cover 3. And Caleb seemed to be seeing that. So I do think that this heavy sort of overdose of information that they were giving him, and I think it's fair to say he was trailing Tyson Bagent and Case Keenum, the other quarterbacks in that room, in terms of digesting that information and understanding it. You were seeing that on the practice field. There's a bunch of pre-snap issues, cadence issues, and don't get me wrong, it's not all perfect, but I do think it's a great sign that especially last week, they had 3 straight practices, which culminated in a joint practice against the Buffalo Bills. I thought it was Caleb's best week of practice. Ben Johnson later confirmed that after the game on Sunday night, and he carried that over into 14 snaps against the Bills. That went well. At this point, that's all you can ask for. It doesn't mean that he's going to take off once the regular season starts, but it is a good sign because it would have been bad if, last week didn't happen, because last week was a significant step in the right direction.
Caleb has said he wants to be coached. And I wanted to ask you, like, when it comes to him overall from last year to this year, where has he grown the most going into year 2? I mean, you mentioned the full work. Have you seen the leadership, the command of the offense, the pre-snap, the decision-making football? Like, what have you seen from him that's taken the biggest leap going into year 2?
Well, I'd like to say, just based on what we saw last weekend, that it's the timing, and getting the ball out faster. I need to see more of that because I still there just needs to be a larger sample size that needs to carry over to the regular season. What I would point to though that I think is more um, applicable to the off season and training camp, and I'm hesitant to talk about this sometimes because I don't want to sound like a knock. I think every quarterback has to go through this. Really, every NFL player, but it's more important for quarterbacks. But understanding what it takes to succeed in this league, it's just a completely different animal than college, right? And so, what I mean by that is, from everything I was told last season, his rookie year, was when he would show up in the morning to the time he left that building, there were no issues. I mean, there was no issues with buy-in. There was no issues with the work ethic. Everything was good. But I think we all know that to be one of these, all in really good quarterbacks, and you don't have to go too far to dig to see this stuff. Go watch the quarterback show on Netflix, right? And see what these guys are doing when they go home and how their wives and girlfriends are quizzing them, on the call sheet and all this stuff. And that's just one example. And so I think it was more of him understanding that, during the season, this is pretty much all you do. You can have all these other outside interests. There's no problem with that. But you got to compartmentalize that so that when it's football season, it's go time. This is what we're doing. And I do think that this training camp's been very beneficial because even in the offseason program, OTAs, these guys are only in the building, they're only allowed to be there for a certain amount of time, a few days a week. Training camp, it's like, okay, no, this is from sun up to sundown. This is all we do. And I think that has really helped Caleb. So if he can carry that mentality and that overall buy-in, and that, again, it's not a knock. It's just I feel like every NFL player who becomes really good eventually hits that point. Sometimes it's year 2 or year 3. Sometimes it's even later where they realize, oh, if I'm going to survive, if I'm going to really reach my potential, this is what it takes in this league.
I would encourage everybody to watch the quarterback series, especially if you're a Bears fan, because Jared Goff is in that, and of course Ben Johnson was his OC, and you'll see what he's doing at home with his wife Kristen Gott. Like, that stuff happens in the house as well, like you said. So that is the normal life of a quarterback, and if you're all in, usually you will see the results. And I want to ask you about the players around Caleb Williams going into this year. There's definitely a lot of talent, and let me just start with the rookies here with Colston Loveland, the first round pick, Luther Burden, the second round pick. How have you seen both of those guys progressing again since training camp started to where it is now? Both those guys had nice games versus the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night, but what are their roles going to be once we do get to Monday Night Football week 1 of the season?
Well, I think it'll be pretty expansive for Colston Loveland, who, it's an easy comp to make, but I think it's actually the comp he should make because it's what Ben Johnson's looking for. He obviously had Sam Laporta in Detroit, and Sam had a great rookie season. And in my opinion, it's definitely the exception to the rule when it comes to rookie tight ends. That's a hard position to really play a ton of snaps and perform at a high level between all your responsibilities in the passing and running game. But Colston Loveland, and really for both of these guys that you asked me about, there's sort of this uneasy feeling in the summertime because they were both hurt. Colston Loveland was drafted despite having offseason shoulder injury. So we knew about that one. We knew we weren't really going to see him till training camp. At least he was around and you could see him going through conditioning. With Luther Burden, he got banged up in rookie minicamp. And then we just didn't really see him until the second week of training camp. And even the first week of training camp, he wasn't even out there. So there was almost starting to be like a panic, Ari, a little bit about like, hey, what's going on with this guy? What's happening? And then in both cases, and it was a little bit more immediate with Colston. Colston finally got out there, and I think it was his first snap, like in 7-on-7s with the ones, and immediately got open, caught a pass from Caleb Williams, and it was like, oh, that looked super easy. And pretty much since then, he hasn't looked back. And you saw it in the game the other night. He was out there with the ones the entire time. They're using him with Cole Kmet. And they're going to use a lot of 12 personnel, I think. And then sometimes they went to 11 personnel, and it was Colston Loveland on the field, not Cole Kmet. So I mean, the fantasy owners out there, managers that might want to take note of that a little bit. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a split. Loveland's going to have to earn his share, but I think that that's something that'll evolve as the season goes along. Luther Burden, there's no question he's got the raw talent. He's one of a few receivers on this team that has true runaway ability once he gets the ball in his hands. I'd also put DJ Moore and Olamide Zaccheaus in that conversation too. So these are all weapons that I think Ben Johnson's eager to use. Burden will have a lower snap share, I think, early on in the season. He just needs to learn the offense more, but really good sign because there was questions about his buy-in when they drafted him, and I think that's a huge reason why he fell to the second round. And why the Bears drafted him is because they were confident that that guy Antoine Randall I mentioned earlier could get the most out of him. And so far, after a little bit of a bumpy road in training camp, Burden's had that buy-in. He made a couple of really nice blocks in that game the other night at the goal line. He's catching the ball smoothly. He can also help you as a punt returner. He did that at Missouri, and he looks very natural catching punts to me. So I have to imagine Ben Johnson's going to have a little part of his play sheet in week 1 of Luther Burden plays that he's going to go to. And it might only be 3 or 4, whatever it is, but the Vikings are going to have to account for him when he's on the field.
He caught 3 passes, 49 yards on Sunday night. Probably the biggest thing, as you said over there, was the blocking. Ben Johnson has said no block, no rock. And he did it on Sunday night, which is part of the buy-in. Let me ask you about the guys who are blocking up front for Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams. They acquired Drew Dahlman in free agency. They traded for Joe Tooney, traded for Jonah Jackson. Right tackle, we know, is Darnell Wright. There is this 4-way competition, I guess, at left tackle. What in the world is going on when it comes to the blind side for Caleb Williams?
Yeah, it's been a little concerning, to be honest. The hope was that, Braxton Jones been the starter, and he was going to be the incumbent. They drafted Ozzie Trapillo with the hopes, coming out of Boston College. He played primarily right tackle. That's where he settled in at Boston College, and they were like, well, let's see if he can do left because he used to play there. And so the hope was Braxton Jones was either going to come back from the injury and feel really good, or Ozzie was going to take that at left tackle and run with it. And now we're deep into training camp. Training camp's almost over. Braxton Jones is still not right. I'll give him a lot of credit. He hasn't missed practice time. He's been out there. He's battling through it. He's trying to get his leg strength back. And that you would think would continue to come. And there's still 3 weeks basically until the opener, so that's good. But Ozzie, all of a sudden, unless there's a sudden shift back when we get to the practice field tomorrow, they moved him back to right tackle, and now he just looks like, at best, he might be the swing tackle to start the season. So, unfortunately, nobody's really seized it. The guy who kind of has is Theo Benedette, who probably most people watching this podcast has never heard of. He played at the University of British Columbia, was an undrafted free agent a year ago. If you watched Hard Knocks last year, you might know who he is because he was the guy who ripped his pants off and had the American Eagle underwear on. So because he's Canadian, everybody calls him the Canadian Eagle now. So it's a great story. But then in the game the other night, Braxton Jones was with the 1s, Theo was with the 2s. I think that's probably going to be how it ends up. And Braxton played pretty good the other night. I'm just a little worried when he's going up against Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel in week 1, and it's a little bit of a different. They're going to have to bring more help over there, and I know that's something that Ben Johnson ideally was not wanting to do because he wants to be able to have his whole playbook open.
I do want to shift over the defense here for the last 10 minutes that we got. Dennis Allen is in. He was doing up and downs at the start of training camp to set the tone. Different environment, different culture with him. He just pitched the shutout versus the Bills on Sunday night in that game. Just overall, him taking over, how have the players responded to him? Because him as a defensive coordinator over the years, he's been pretty good.
Yeah, and I haven't been exposed to Dennis Allen with too much until he got here. I mean, just kind of watching from afar, obviously, for all these years. It felt like a really good hire at the time. It felt like it could even be an upgrade. The thing about Matt Eberflus, he obviously was not a good enough head coach. It went pretty poorly, but his defenses were solid. And even the Cowboys getting Eberflus down there, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you're getting a former head coach who's proven to be a pretty good DC, but I still felt like Dennis Allen could be an upgrade over what the Bears had with Eberflus, and partly because of his track record, but also because I just felt like a lot of the players that they've acquired here over the last few years, even during the Eberflus era, actually fit Dennis Allen's style better. Like, it's a more aggressive defense. And so you got guys like a Jalen Johnson or a Kyler Gordon in the secondary, or Jaquan Brisker, Tyreek Stevenson, even, who might not be guaranteed a starting job. But these guys are all, to me, long, get in your face, be more aggressive type players. And I, as good as the Bears defense was at times under Matt Eberflus, it just felt like it wasn't the right fit for some of these guys, where you weren't maximizing their ability with them just sitting back and doing sort of this bend and don't break scheme. So I think it's been same thing you mentioned earlier about how Caleb Williams was craving coaching. Like, I feel like these defensive players have been kind of craving a little bit more freedom and more aggressiveness, and Dennis Allen's giving them that. And really, from day one, it's been a good fit between a new coach coming in and the players that were already there, and that's important because a lot of times, I would almost say most of the time, it's not that way. Even if it's not a full head coaching change, it's just a new coordinator coming in, it takes a year or two to kind of, oh, you know what, we got to swap out this defensive end. This defensive tackle doesn't fit our scheme. That's another one, by the way. Javon Dexter is somebody people should know about, because they drafted him a couple years ago out of Florida, where they didn't really play the same style defense. They tried to make him a prototypical 3 technique shoot up field through the gap, and that's not really his game. In this scheme with Dennis Allen, he looks completely different. He looks really, really good. In fact, he's sort of knocked Andrew Billings down with the twos at times, and Andrew Billings been nothing but an outstanding player since he got to Chicago. So that's another guy I'd keep in mind. It's a long way of me saying the defense looks like it's a pretty good shape. All right, I don't know if it'll be a top 5 unit, but I think top 10 is very realistic for this Bears defense this season.
I want to ask you about just the back end of this defense, because Jalen Johnson has been injured for most of camp with a leg injury, I believe. Jaquan Brisker missed a lot of time last year with a concussion. Tyreek Stevenson, you said, might not be a starter. He had his not so fun moment last year. How is this back end looking right now going into the season?
Well, despite everything you just said, I think it's the strength of the defense. But yes, there's some pretty significant question marks. Jalen Johnson, I'm not too concerned. It was a little bit of a weird injury where I think it happened right before training camp, like maybe the week leading up to training camp. In his training, some type of soft tissue. We did see him out there on the field pregame Sunday night. That was a really good sign, because we haven't really seen him do anything at practice yet. So with 3 weeks to go, I'm fairly confident Jalen Johnson will play week 1. And he's the type of guy at this point in his career that I think you could feel maybe there's a little rust he's got to knock off, but I'm not too worried about him. He's one of the better corners, still probably one of the more underrated corners in the entire league. And another guy who I think this defense fits him better too. Kyler Gordon's also been out. He's a very important player in this defense who got paid this offseason. I think they made him the highest paid nickel back in the entire league. So he's dealt with some hamstring stuff before, which is a little concerning, but assuming he's back, and they are expecting him back before camp's over, so it should be soon. He should be all right. Tyreek Stevenson, I think he'll be the starter. I should have mentioned that Nashawn Wright, a former 3rd-round pick of the Cowboys who spent last year in Minnesota, he's got history with Al Harris, which is why they brought him over here. He's just had a really good camp and has really pushed Tyreek Stevenson. So there's some depth there that I think is okay. The big question mark to me, Ari, is Jaquan Brisker, because he just brings a different energy, a high level of energy that most defenses want to have from somebody out there, especially if it's a safety on the back end. And they when he's in the game, they're better. There's no question. And so it's just a matter though with his concussion history. I hate to say it, it just feels like it's inevitable. Like when's the next one going to come and how much is that going to keep him out considering the last one? I think he missed the last 12 games of the season last year. So it is a little bit concerning about what might happen at some point, but so far so good, and he looks really good. So you just hope he stays healthy.
Mean, all concussions are different, but we just did a preview of the Saints. It's the same questions with Chris Olave, who has dealt with a bunch of them in his career. So you never know what could happen when potentially another one comes, as you said. Last two things here before I wrap it up. The two new faces on the defensive front with Grady Jarrett and Dayo Odeyingbo, how have they looked so far coming into this team?
Well, I'll probably give you two different answers here on each one. So Grady Jarrett's been great. Grady Jarrett I love this signing for the Bears. I was surprised he was let go by the Falcons, but I understood it. He just brings energy is that's another guy I would attach that word to because he's just the veteran leadership, the lead by example. He's constantly coaching up the younger guys. And by the way, every time the ball is snapped, he's just 110% every single snap, whether it's the first day of training camp and they don't even have pads on or it's a game. So as long as Grady Jarrett stays healthy, I think it's going to be a great pickup for the Bears. And in terms of the health, you can look at it two ways. So he had an ACL injury 2 seasons ago. He played every game last year, but was not quite the same player, which I'm sure is why the Falcons with the money decided to move on. If you want to look at it glass half full, I know there's a belief within the Bears that a year removed from that injury, he could be even better. Now, glass half empty is he's older player and is he a declining veteran? I haven't seen that yet. Maybe it's coming. I think there's a very good chance, though, that there's a middle ground in there where the Bears get a really good 2025 out of him. And then maybe the tail off comes after that. But I think that that's very much on the table from what I've seen. Dayo Odeyingbo, I don't want to knock the guy yet. Haven't seen enough of him. They signed him in the offseason. It was definitely more of a boom or bust type player where they're taking a guy who hasn't really had the sack totals in his career. I think he only had 3.5 last year. But they're going, you know what? He's young. He fits the Dennis Allen type of size, length. And we think we can maximize his talent here in this scheme, in this defense. I haven't seen it yet. I think there's been some flashes here and there. Maybe they're just holding on till the regular season, but I'm a little concerned that I just haven't seen enough from Dayo Odeyingbo yet. The good news is Montez Sweat's had a really good camp, and that's very important for the Bears that he bounces back from a subpar year last year.
I have a quick big picture question here before I ask you the final question I ask everybody. We know the division is tough, don't have to go through that, but what is the definition of success in 2025? Is it competing for a playoff spot? Is it just simply proving Caleb and Ben is the right pairing? Like, what would that be? The pulse of the fan base, what do you think that is?
Well, that last one you mentioned is probably the most important big picture, regardless of wins and losses. The Bears are shooting for the stars here with the number 1 pick, Caleb Williams, and you could call him the number 1 pick and the head coach ranks too with Ben Johnson because this guy has been the most sought after candidate the last 3 years, really. And the Bears got him. And it was somewhat surprising, honestly, that he wanted to come to Chicago as bad as he did. But you have to imagine Caleb Williams was a big reason in that. So that has to be what works, regardless of wins and losses. That has to be the pairing that works here. So that's most important. But this is not just a team that's rebuilding and trying to, squeeze the most out of the head coach, quarterback, and everything else is just gravy. There's legitimate talent here. I mean, Ryan Poles has been building this up. We talked about the defense. The weapons across the board are pretty impressive. So I don't think it can just be that. I think that this is a team that I'll just put it like this. I think it'd be disappointing if they're not playing meaningful football in week 17 and 18. I don't think you necessarily have to make the playoffs. Like it's, oh, they don't make the playoffs. It was a disappointing year. But maybe look at the Lions when they first came on, right? Like they made that push. They were in it in week 18. They got eliminated earlier in the day, which was unfortunate, but then they went out and they beat the Packers anyway that night. And ended the Packers season. That kind of was their Super Bowl. Like, so that type of scenario, I think would be a win for this team this year with what they have and considering how tough this division will probably be too. But I also think it's on the table that they can make the playoffs. So I don't want to say that that's not a possibility. It all could click here, and they have one of those, worst of first seasons that we see every single year in the NFL.
Well, it starts Monday night versus division rival and the Minnesota Vikings. Adam, before I let you go, and I really appreciate all the time, I ask this question to every guest who comes on over here. We just had Declan Doyle on the show last week. This is the NFL Spotlight Show. We love spotlighting people in the NFL who deserve more recognition, get to know more about them. You know this Bears organization more than anybody. Who is somebody from that organization, player, coach, executive, who maybe needs a little bit more spotlight?
All right. Well, for some people watching this who know who I am probably won't be surprised by this, but if you don't, I'm a special teams guy, high school special teams coordinator for 5 years. So I got to give love to Richard Hightower, who I think is one of the best special teams coordinators in the league. I don't think special teams coordinators in general don't get enough love. I personally think that they should be given more looks at head coaching jobs because I don't think people realize that in a game on a sideline, the special teams coordinator is actually probably the second most locked in to the actual game to the head coach, because on any given when the possession's over, there's a special teams play that follows, and and there's 6 phases. People don't realize there's 6 phases just within special teams. So you have to be constantly juggling which one's next, which one's coming up, and all of it has to do with clock, possession, situational stuff. And that's why I don't understand why I don't get more looks, because I don't think any other position or coordinator coach on any given team is as locked in on some of that stuff that head coaches need to be locked in once they get the job. So I just wanted to, that's my little rant on that. All that to be said, Richard Hightower was kept on by the previous coaching staff. For a reason. He's really good at what he does. He's respected in the league. He's been on the committee that's been working on this dynamic kickoff, a huge voice and all that. And part of that is, I don't know if people realize his history. So you've heard of, at some point, we've probably all heard about those amazing coaching rooms back in the day that included Kyle Shanahan and Matt LaFleur. Mike McDaniel was in there, right? And there's a whole bunch of other ones. Well, the guy that doesn't get talked about in that group, who they all shared like these coaching rooms together, Richard Hightower was there too. He's from that same coaching tree, just on the special team side of it. So this guy knows his stuff. He's really good. I thought it was very important that Ben Johnson kept him around because he knows this roster just as a special teams guy too. And I don't know if he'll ever get his look as a head coach. I hope at some point he's at least interviewed, because I think teams can learn a lot from him if he does. But yeah, Richard Hightower is one of the best to do it. I know we as reporters enjoy talking to him every week when we get that opportunity just to learn some things about him. So he's definitely somebody around the league that more people should know about.
Love the pick. We had Darren Rizzi, who's now the Broncos special teams coordinator, on the show about a year ago. He mentioned Richard by name as well. Very respected. And like you said, when somebody is held on with a new staff, that means the guy's doing a good job, because everyone tries to bring in, whether it's guys they've worked with before, their friends, whatever it is. And Ben kept Richard on staff, and that definitely says a lot. So we will get to work on it. But Adam, I really appreciate the time, all the insight. You are one of the very best at what you do, regardless of which team it is. And everyone really enjoys your coverage. I know I do, and everyone could follow your work. Follow you on X, Adam, on your social media pages, and of course, watch you your show on YouTube as well. So thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ari. I feel the same way about you. You do great work, always following along, and this show's been great. So thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.